Is masculinity taught or is it hardwired? Let's take a deeper look at the 8-week window. Let's look at a few biological markers that define the prenatal androgen. The average is around 0.97. Okay, I get it. I know what you're thinking. What exactly is 2D by 4D ratio? Now, take your right hand, look at your index finger. The other indicator is a larger nose. Is masculinity taught or is it hardwired? Is a man's personality shaped by the society or is it hardwired in the womb by week 14? Let's take a deeper look at the 8-week window that changes everything or sets the blueprint for how you shape up. So, in today's discussion, I'm going to cover the physical markers or the biological markers, the behavioral markers or traits, the trade offs, everything has a trade off, and the limitations of prenatal exposure. And we'll also finally look at how to cope or compensate for some of the downsides. So, I've taken some notes. Let's go one step at a time. This one is going to be very interesting, so don't miss out. Number one, so let's look at a few biological markers that define the prenatal androgen exposure or what we call as androgen shower. So there are some methods by which you can identify if someone is exposed to high prenatal testosterone or let's say a higher androgen shower that is being exposed to. One of the factors is a low 2D to 4D ratio of between 0.94 0.95 while the average is around 0.97. Okay, I get it. I know what you're thinking. What exactly is 2D by 4D ratio? Now, take your right hand, look at your index finger, this one, and your ring finger, this one. Now, if your 2D, that is your index finger divided by ring finger, that is the length of the second digit divided by the length of the fourth digit is lower than 0.9495 or around that, it means you are exposed to high prenatal testosterone. For a lot of people, the average is around 0.96, 0.97, and this varies by country and let's say some other markers as well in terms of ethnicity, etc. But by and large, if there is a distinct difference in terms of the height, that is, if your ring finger is significantly larger than your ring finger, it is very likely that you are exposed to high prenatal testosterone when you were in your mother's womb. That's one indicator. The other indicator is a larger nose compared to people, right? So if you have a larger volume and a nose and let's say bigger nostrils, I'll also explain why that is so. That also kind of correlates very strongly to high prenatal testosterone. Now, number 3, this one is very interesting. There is something called as anogenital distance, which is measured by the anoscrotal distance. That is, if you take the center of anus and to the base of the scrotum, of course, I'm talking about males here, right? From the center of anus, if you measure the length to the base of the scrotum, if that length is larger, then you are exposed to high prenatal testosterone. One of the things you have to understand here is that a combination of all of three will more likely indicate that you had high exposure, but it is also very pertinent to understand that you may still have a small nose and have high prenatal testosterone. You may still have digits which are similar in length or as a factor of 1, which means both are similar or slightly lower, but you still have lower testosterone, right? Now, these are kind of correlating factors, which means if you have one of it, it is likely that you are exposed to high prenatal testosterone, right? That is exactly what you have to understand. But if you have a low 2D to 4D ratio and a larger nose and nostrils, etc., and a V-taper, bunch of other factors, and a larger anogenital distance or anoscrotal distance, then the likelihood that you are exposed to high prenatal testosterone is higher. That is exactly what I want to say. Now, there is also an interesting aspect to it. People with these kind of exposures or high prenatal exposures also tend to have slightly higher than average penile length as well, to the extent of almost more than a about more than an inch longer than the normal length that you are likely to find out. Cool. So I think I've spoken to you about 2D slash 4D ratio. 2D slash 4D ratio, larger nose and volume, and also spoke about anogenital or anoscrotal distance. So these are three physical or biological markers that kind of indicate that someone has a larger penile length and also is exposed to high prenatal testosterone. Let's also look at a few more aspects of how physically you can identify a person with high exposure in his mother's womb is also likely to have a V taper and slightly better muscle mass. We will also discuss why that is required. Kind of, if you look at it, he finds it easier to build muscles. He's built for sudden speed, hunting, and explosive power. Right. So those are some of the factors when you have high androgen exposure. Cool. One thing you have to also remember is these persist lifelong, that is aiding athletic build but risking hypertension. Okay, cool. So I think I've covered the biological markers. Let's look at a few more body composition angles. Fitness, superior strength and endurance, that is bodybuilding proxy. Behavior, persistent hustling, mental toughness, etc. Risks, hyperactivity, lower empathy. Right. So we'll go little into the behavioral aspects much later, but what I can tell you is a prenatal T, it kind of sets a baseline bias, that is, things like grit, aggression, power, and aptitude, etc. This is kind of a template or a blueprint that is set for you when you are in your mother's womb between weeks of 8 and 14. It is decided, that's about it, right? But it doesn't mean you can't change it. A lot of it also depends on your upbringing, the diet, training, hormones, and of course, puberty and other aspects too. But bunch of these things are fixed. You can't change it after that. Okay. So let's also look at, now that we understood how to identify the biological markers, before I go into the behavioral aspects, let's all look at what are the aspects that could potentially influence why somebody has a low 2D 4D ratio, why somebody is able to build muscles faster, why someone probably has a larger nose versus other population which doesn't have, other populations, men who may not exhibit or show such physical markers, right? I'll just read a little bit about that. The level of testosterone a fetus is exposed to in the womb is influenced by a mix of maternal and paternal and environmental factors. Maternal factors, naturally occurring hormonal levels, that is PCOS, high stress levels, increase adrenal androgens, and the efficiency of the placenta in filtering the hormones. Paternal aspect. It's primarily genetic. The father passes down the sensitivity of androgen receptors, which determines how strongly the body reacts to the wash. So imagine that there is going to be a testosterone bath or androgen bath that you're going to go to, and your body different parts of the body like your penis, your nose, your fingers, and your brain and bunch of other organs also react to these androgen wash in different ways for different people, right? So not everyone who's exposed to the same level of testosterone is going to exhibit the same markers. It could vary from male to male. So there is millions of possibilities and combinations that a man can be exposed to. Environmental factors. Maternal smoking, certain dietary habits, and exposure to endocrine disrupting chemicals like phthalates can shift the hormonal balance. Number 4, biological traits. While digit ratio is organizational, that is set at birth, adult traits like beard growth or activational. So this is the activation part that I spoke about. So you have androgen receptors in multiple parts of the body. Which part shows higher sensitivity depends which ones you develop. For example, if your digit had high androgen sensitivity, it might grow bigger. If your penile area had high androgen sensitivity, it might grow bigger. So it depends on how your programming and reception to the androgen wash is done depending on the male who was in the mom. Now, let's also look at a few behavioral aspects of such people with high testosterone and let's say high androgen exposure in their when they were in the mother's womb, right? Real world applications. These people are thrill seeking, high dopamine seeking folks, which means they are very high risk takers. Low ratios are often linked to high sensation seeking and financial risk taking. Spatial awareness, a potential slight edge in mental rotation and navigation tasks, resilience, a higher natural predisposition for task oriented coping, and determination in high pressure work and social environments. They are also prone to overexertion, extremely high energy and drive, and very strong long pursuits. The hunter or the warrior material that you can potentially say. So, you kind of think of these people as kind of a race car versus a sedan that can run smoothly at very long distances. These are like race cars with a high engine in a compact body built for explosive power and sudden performance. Now, what are the other behavioral aspects? Let's look at it. So, there's something, let's look at the mental toughness, because I also told you that people with high androgen exposure, or let's say high prenatal testosterone, also are programmed very differently right from their brain, not just the physical aspects, right? Which I will touch upon. Now, the parts of the brain that tackle with emotion, that tackle with dopamine reception, etc., are programmed very differently in these people, which is why they seek continuous burst of energy, entertainment or stimulation. Otherwise, they get really bored. For example, a person who's quite happy looking at watching a movie or spending time with someone, the people on the contrary who are exposed to high testosterone may not just feel good doing that. They need continuous activity which is much more stimulating than just maybe watching a movie or something, right? Okay, let's look at mental toughness definitions. So these people take riskier bets. They naturally can actually be into sports. There are a lot of people into athleticism or athletics. They are also into stock market and traders, which means they have gambling tendencies because they need continuous high and unpredictability of life. So there is something called as SMTQ. So this called sport mental toughness questionnaire. This measures three pillars of psychological resilience, right? So I'm going to touch upon at a high level. I will not go very deep into it, but since I'm touching on behavioral aspects so that you can judge a person or judge yourself, this will be helpful in identifying if you're one of these persons or you're a different person. Confidence. These people have extremely high confidence in themselves, belief in one's ability to achieve goals. Constancy, the persistence to keep working very hard under fatigue or failure. So these are slightly different markers or traits that you will find in high pre-testosterone or prenatal exposure people. Number three, control, the ability to remain calm and keep emotions stable under pressure. In all these factors, high T people score very well, and they are like kind of honey badgers. They don't give up easily and are very resilient. Now, we've seen that there are specific advantages to such people. We've seen explosive power, resilience, mental toughness, high energy, high libido, um, let's say too much belief in their ability beyond a point. They don't get exerted pretty easily, easy to build muscle, and built for athletics and explosive power. Not everything is given to you, right? So the God always gives you trade offs, and nature also gives you a trade off. Like, what? Let's look at some of the downsides of such people too. I did mention briefly that the brain is also programmed differently in the sense that their um, dopamine reception, or let's say the high baseline dopamine requirement is there, and they need continuous stimulation. Now, what is the downside due to that? They are prone to a lot of addictions, substance based addictions like alcohol. Multiple studies, including a large meta analysis, confirmed that lower digit ratios, which is a proxy for high prenatal testosterone, is significantly associated with alcohol dependency in men. One study found that the right hand ratio was the most accurate predictor, which is why I showed you the right hand, right? 2D/4D ratio. Hard substances. Similar trends have been observed in methamphetamine dependence and heroin use, which means they are actually not just addicted or prone to addiction to alcohol, but also to other substances such as meth and heroin. They need more stimulation, right? What else? And so you might ask why, right? Scientists believe that the androgen wash organizes the brain's reward system, specifically the mesolimbic dopamine pathway, to be more responsive to high arousal stimuli or chemical rewards, which is why they are wired differently. So, people, if you think you are in that zone, you better watch out, because you need to find a way to redirect this high stimulation that you warrant into a better direction, which is more productive. Of course, I will talk about it in a while when I speak about, let's say, some of the coping mechanisms that you could pursue. Let's also look at behavioral addictions, which are non substance based. Because the high T brain profile is often linked to sensation seeking and impulsivity, they are very impulsive. It also correlates with modern behavioral addictions. Internet and smartphone addiction, video gaming, for example, again linked to high masculine nature. The other aspect, which also plays a large role in terms of how you behave, these people are slightly more sexually deviant and they seek more short term partners. They pursue more partners, ejaculate faster, which has been shown in rat models, and prioritize more visual fertile cues in women over emotional depth initially. In the sense, they are more prone towards feminine, curvy, or visual cues that a woman can exhibit than the emotional aspect. So, these are some of the downsides, right? Essentially aligning with CAD strategy. So if you look at DAD versus CAD, or the CHAD that they say, these are aligning with CAD strategies for reproductive spread, because they are high testosterone, they are interested in spreading the seeds more than settling down initially. They are also prone towards gambling because they seek high stimulation and rewards all the time. Okay, cool. So I'm also going to touch a little bit on this dopamine receptors and neurotransmission, but at a very high level, I will not go deep into that. Researchers suggest that prenatal testosterone influences the dopaminergic system through several biological mechanisms: gene expression, neural circuitry, and sensitivity to environment. For example, in males, high prenatal testosterone may act as a sensitizer. Research indicates it can increase the brain's vulnerability to other prenatal stressors, such as maternal nicotine or alcohol use, which further disrupts dopamine pathways in prefrontal cortex, which means they can potentially have slightly weaker prefrontal cortex too, which means their decision making can actually be impacted if not channelized in the right direction. Neural circuitry. High levels of hormones are linked to increased cell death in certain brain regions and slower overall neural development. This can result in permanent structural changes to the circuitry connecting the striatum, connecting which handles the motor control, and prefrontal cortex, again, which handles decision making. In terms of gene expression, in boys, the dopamine system develops more slowly, which may actually lengthen the period during which it is vulnerable to these hormonal influences. So, these are some dopamine receptors and neurotransmitter aspects that I want to cover. Let's look at associated behaviors, a little more behavioral aspects, and then go into coping mechanisms and the trade offs. Hyperactivity, impulsivity, this was the most significant behavioral link found. Children with high prenatal exposure showed higher levels of disinhibited behaviors, such as acting without thinking and high physical activity. So these people are extremely energetic and they show very high physical activity. Why am I covering children aspect now? So if you have a child who's a male, you can look for, apart from the physical markers that I explained, you can also look at some of these associated behaviors to see if your child falls under that umbrella, so that you can take some actions towards, let's say, mediating or ameliorating some of these aspects to channel his energy in the right direction. Number two, sensation seeking and surgency. The hormonal shifts are associated with traits like surgency, high levels of energy and sociability and sensation seeking. Number three, sex typed play. The research notes that these biological changes influence non clinical behaviors such as preference for rough, tumble play, which is typically more common in males. Number four, aggression and conduct problems. While the focus also is on ADHD, the masculinized brain, right? This profile was associated with increased risk for aggression and oppositional behaviors, which means these guys are also not rule followers. They're always going to go do something very individualistic. They are kind of rule breakers in a way. So you will find trouble with their behaviors in school. And I'm sure if the principal or school teacher has called you quite often, your child is likely to fall under this category. Cool. I think we pretty much covered a lot of technical details. We explained the physical markers. We explained some of the reasons why some people are programmed that way. We also figured what are the behavioral aspects of such people. And we also looked at a little bit of brain programming and the dopamine pathway, mesolimbic, etc., to kind of understand how their dopamine baseline is slightly higher and how certain things works for them in terms of tyrosine hydrolex. I'll not go a little deeper into that, but some more behavioral aspects I can think of is they have reduced unconscious fear response and lower sensitivity to punishment, which makes individuals more likely to engage in high risk, reward driven behaviors. So that's another aspect. They have extreme male brain. Some theories suggest that very high levels of prenatal androgen can lead to extreme version of male typical play and social development, impacting traits like empathy and aggression. In the sense, like I told you, in terms of pair bonding, these people are slightly less empathetic towards other people. So you might want to keep that also in mind. So we discussed most of the behavioral and physical aspects of it. Now, let's say if you're a man in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, if you fall under this category, obviously you can measure with a combination of your nose with your penile length plus 2D/4D ratio. Of course, it's very difficult for yourself to measure your ano-scrotal distance. It's pretty hard. So I'm going to leave that out. But if you have a combination of at least some of these markers, then the coefficient factor, which they measure in scientific terms, is R equal to some factor. That's the relational aspect. Uh, it's supposedly around zero 0.5 to zero 0.6, in the sense if you have almost 3 or 4 more of these physical traits and some of these behavioral aspects, it is very likely more than 50-60% chance that you were exposed to high prenatal testosterone. Now, what can you do to cope with some of it or channelize your high energy into a direction that makes more sense for you so that you don't fall into trouble by going deep into smoking, alcohol, or substances, and also behavioral risk factors or financial risk factors like gambling your house away, right? So let's look at some of it. Emotional stability. Implement a 5-second pause before reacting to conflict. This brief delay allows prefrontal cortex to override the immediate impulsive response, mitigating aggression. Now, I told you these people are extremely impulsive and they can react very angrily to most situations. So, if you have to learn how to control that, you need to practice a little bit of meditation, or let's say get into more into workouts and other tendencies to channelize your extreme inbuilt energy into form that is more productive and constructional or constructive, right? Persistence. Use micro goal settings during high fatigue tasks. Breaking a large project into 20-minute sprints leverages the masculine drive for completion without burnout or overexertion. Now, since these people are very purposeful and goal driven, you have to set certain goals for yourself, however big or small, break that into smaller chunks and keep at it, keep at it, keep at it, because these people will not give up easily any which way. So, to get that high, instead of having a smoke or a heroin or a cocaine or let's say multiple sexual partners, you might want to channelize them to something like writing, working out, running, or any physical activity that gives you enough exertion as well as channelizes your brain and settles your autonomous nervous system to make sure your parasympathetic nervous system, the ones that is, rest and digest system, is more activated and ensures that you're calm and you don't react impulsively or angrily to most situations. Number three, problem solving and task coping. These people are extremely good at solving problems. I just told you, right? When facing a risky situation, perform a binary risk analysis. Write down the objective technical variables of the risk versus emotional impulses to ground your decision making logic. Now, it's pretty hard to define what else you can do as a person, but if you are one of those persons who fall under this category, I would strongly urge that you read a little bit more about it. First, identify if you are one of these high prenatal testosterone exposed male, and if that's the case, look at a lot of aspects that gives you calmness. You have to do that. If you don't, you are more likely to go onto a destructive path. Now, the funny thing, or let's say the worst thing about such people, is that even on the destructive path, they go all in. They go all in on the constructive path. They go all in on the destructive path, right? So if you are, I mean, you pretty much know about yourself more than other people. So you might want to figure out what is the right path for you and channelize all your energy into constructive means, such that you lead a better life and avoid the destructive tangent that you may be genetically prone to and programmatically prone to. Now, I also mentioned that you can cope up with all of this in some very effective ways. The other aspect that you have to understand is that not all of it is decided when you're in the mother's womb. That is, their 8 to 14-week period kind of sets the blueprint for you and programs a lot of it in a very fixed manner. But that doesn't mean you're kind of locked in and you cannot change. I was also reading a little bit about how much flexible it is and what are the other factors that dictates or influences your masculinization or your behavior. It kind of there are various studies and results, but roughly it looks like about anywhere from 15 to 25, 30% is decided by what happened in your mother's womb when you were 8 to 14 weeks old. But a lot of other factors like your behavioral aspects, your environment aspects play about 50 to 60% role into, let's say, managing it, coping it, and also directing it in the right way. So it's not like if you are low testosterone, you cannot change it, or if you are very high testosterone, you're prone to bad things, you cannot change it. You have a way or an option to change yourself if you uh, practice the right methods to tweak yourself. So that's pretty much what I had to cover. Hope you found it as interesting as I did, as I did research on multiple aspects. Little did I know that, your finger digits, your nose, and anogenital distance. I mean, the nature is just so wonderful that we always have surprises every single day. I hope you found it interesting. If so, share it with your friends. And if you like the content, why don't you just drop in a comment or two, which will make me do more such content as well. Thank you. Cheers.